Why are people so scared of talking with native speakers? Now, in this video, what I'm going to do is more of a podcast type episode where it's less edited, less cut, and more to the point, more my thoughts just coming out as they arrive. But in this video, in this one to start with, a big problem that people have when it comes to language learning is having the confidence and not being anxious when it comes to speaking with native speakers, because that is unfortunately a big part of how you learn language. You can use Duolingo or an app or you like, but there comes a point where you sort of had enough of filling in the blanks on this language app that you're using, and it's now time to actually react when you're in a restaurant, in a bar, wherever you want to learn your target language for. You need to be able to practice it and be okay with getting around situations, even if you're not fluent or you don't know much of the target language. If you want to be able to speak the language, like if you read and write it, that's a different matter. But if you want to be able to speak the language and have a conversation, you have to do that in practice with native speakers. But many experiences in your past and many attempts you've done in the past have been bad. And because of that, you've learned, oh, this is fearful, this is anxiety inducing, and let's not do it. So in this video, I'm going to cover why it is that you're scared of practicing with natives, because quite often we don't even know ourselves why we're scared, and also what you can do to progress and to bypass that fear and to overcome it. Now, you're never going to be completely fearless when it comes to speaking with natives. So I have 12 or 13 years of experience with language learning. So my journey, for those of you who are new, that I'm English, and in 2013 I lived a year in Spain, well, 9 months, my Erasmus year, and then after that, sort of I arrived knowing basically hardly anything in Spanish, like hello, 1 to 10, that was about it. I didn't even know how to say excuse me or anything. But then after 9 months of living there, I could have a conversation with someone in Spanish or have a phone call essentially and communicate with Spanish speakers. In other terms, I was about B2. If those of you who are familiar with language learning, that's level I was at, so I was like intermediate. But I learned from that keeping having a go, making mistakes, and making a fool of yourself in that sense is absolutely fine. The more you're okay with making mistakes, the faster you can progress. And actually, it's contrary to how we were in like school or in language schools, where you get marked on how good you are, or when you're writing exams, you get marked on that. And many people fail that, but they're a lot better at speaking and communicating um, without writing it down. So in this episode, that was a very long intro, but in this episode, I'm going to cover a few factors. So my aim for this channel is to educate or to share information to people as to how they can learn a different language, and it applies to any language because it's more psychological rather than here's how to say tomorrow in Spanish. But I can speak Spanish and Italian. My partner is Italian, and about a few years ago, I started dedicating myself and really trying to get good at Italian. So now they're at about a similar level. I alternate between Spanish and Italian because I've tried learning them both at the same time or practicing them both, and I just get them mixed up because they're too similar. But the point is, I love the psychology behind language learning, and in this YouTube channel, I aim to share what I know about the psychology so that it's easier for people to learn language, because the amount of like tools and resources that we have nowadays on the internet and different language apps mean that it should be easier than ever to learn language. You've got access to all this information, all the grammar, everything you could like wish for, and yet so many people are still struggling to learn language, and they're hammering Duolingo. I've seen people with like 1,000-day streaks, and then you ask them to say something or to have a conversation, and they don't feel comfortable. They might be capable of doing it, but they don't feel comfortable. And so let's start from the first point, the psychology point. So why is it that you might be scared of speaking with a native speaker? Well, an example is in the past, if you're in a restaurant or something and you were sat there and it's a busy restaurant, very crowded, you're on holiday in Spain, for example, and in the past few months you've been trying to practice Spanish, you get to a restaurant, you've got your family and friends on the table, you're having a good time chatting, and the waiter comes over and you're like, right, now's a good time to practice my Spanish. Let's say, is this food spicy or something? Let's practice saying that. And then you get to it and the waiter comes over. You don't really assess the situation, you just think, let's have a go at practicing, but you don't realise that waiter's having a bad day, and they're very rushed, and they've got to get your order right, otherwise their manager will tell them off. So you start by saying, oh, is this this meat I'm interested in, it looks very nice, is it spicy? And then they're like, oh, no, no, no. And then they switch to English. So you're saying that in Spanish, they switch to English. And they're like, oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. And you get a bad response. It doesn't matter what they say, really. Just the response isn't positive. And you're like, wow, that's a bit of an annoyed person. So that creates a negative experience in your mind. You think, well, I might as well not try speaking Spanish then if they're not going to be grateful for what I'm doing. So that's an example of how you can learn that, of how you have in your mind that it's not good to practice a language. So you might be thinking, if I try and speak Spanish and I'm not perfect, then a native speaker is going to not like me for it. And that is where you get it from. That's one example. Another example is if you're at school and you're studying French or something, like me, for example, and I did okay in French, but I couldn't say a word or understand much. So I would not consider myself even like above a basic level. But I could sort of write roughly okay, but I wasn't very good at it. But then that taught me that I felt that I wasn't good at languages from that point. That was at school. It was only until I was at uni in 2013 where I went on my Erasmus year, went there knowing nothing, and then I could actually have a conversation with people. Obviously, I was on my Erasmus year, so I was drinking and stuff and more socializing, but I was also taking lessons when I was there. So I was on like a language course in Spanish, completely taught to you in Spanish, and I was like, what is going on? Didn't understand a word of it. But then when I was socializing, I would make so many mistakes. I'd try putting words together and I'd laugh at it. I'd speak in Spanglish, as we call it, so Spanish and English, a combination. So you might be starting a sentence in Spanish, and I would not be confident that I knew the rest of that sentence. I might be saying, where are we going to tonight? And I might not know the word for tonight. I might just say, where are we going to? And then point or do some sort of hand gesture to signal that it's tonight, or where we're going to. That might be enough for the context. But then the response I got from that was like, I learned that you don't need to be perfect. And there was one moment where I sat around sort of pre-drinks when we were having a few drinks before going out, and someone said to me, someone was like, oh, are you drinking that? Or I said to them or something like, oh, do you want some of this vodka? And that's what I wanted to say, but it came out completely different in Spanish. It was like, want the vodka you or something. And I was like, surely that can't work. And then they replied to me, oh, no, thank you. Um, and then that was understood. So they understood what I was saying. And that was like, wait a minute, you understood me despite not getting 100% in my grammar while saying that. And that sort of taught me a lesson that you don't need to be perfect. And in actual fact, if I'd have not said anything because I wasn't perfect and I didn't know the full sentence and I hadn't practiced, I wouldn't have learnt that. So in the same sense of like riding a bike or driving, obviously driving might be a bit different, but you have to fall off and make errors in order to progress. People think, oh yeah, it's fine. People think, oh yeah, I'll wait until I'm a certain level before I talk to people in that language. But if you're learning if you're learning, say, I don't know any Chinese or Japanese, but if I'm taught a word for like how are you or something or what, for example, and I say it and I'm understood, that's enough to get going. And in the sense of like when you start from scratch, if you start in a new language, I wouldn't recommend learning words. Learn a phrase. So it's more useful so you can actually use it. So if, for example, I'm learning Spanish and I want to go into a restaurant, I might learn phrases like, oh, how much is this? Is it spicy? Table for four, please. Or the basics that you'd expect to say in your native language. That's a different topic, basically. But my point is that if you have had bad experiences in the past where you learn, you're trying to learn stuff, but then you're getting a lot wrong, and that knocks your confidence, then that can be brought up in the current day, and you can be thinking, I don't want to speak, but you might not think of it consciously. So that's the issue there. To combat that, though, the alternative is to build evidence that you can do. So you have to override the bit of software in your mind that says, I cannot speak this language. And you have to override it with evidence. Like, it's all good and well staring at the mirror and saying, oh yeah, I'm a confident language learner. I can learn multiple languages. I'm amazing at this. I'm really clever. But then if you've got nothing to show you that you can do it, even if to yourself, even if you don't need to prove to anyone else, but you need evidence for yourself. You need proof that you can do it. And in order to do that, you need to practice with a native speaker. However, it does matter how you set it up. So if you're set up in a busy place where there's a lot going on, don't even bother. You have to pick your moments to get the exposure to have a go at speaking the target language that you want to. So if you want to practice Spanish and you're living in England, don't book a holiday and go to Spain. I mean, you can do, but you might be setting yourself up to failure, especially if you're in a touristy area like Benidorm or something, where there's mainly English speakers there. So I would recommend instead having a language partner, essentially. And there's a few different ways you can do that. But first of all, there's online language apps like Tandem and HelloTalk. They can be really useful. I'm not sponsored by any of them, but they can be really useful for, like, you just download the app and you can connect with loads of people. Initially, you have like filters where you can select if it's like male or female or what their level is in your native language. So you can have it well matched to you, so your interests sort of correspond or align basically. But that's the first port of call because that's free. Because essentially what it is an exchange of time. So if you're going to spend half an hour talking with them in their language, then you can like reverse it and have half an hour speaking in yours. So you help them with English, they help you with Spanish. That's how it works. But yeah, there's a few different online language apps that you can use. And also in person, it depends where you're living. But if you're living in the countryside, in a rural place, it might be harder. If you're in a city though, like I'm fairly close to Manchester in England, and there's a few meetup groups. It's called like meetup.com, and you can actually have a language exchange there. And the downside is you've got to make it part of your routine. So if you go once and chat with people for 2 hours in an evening on a Thursday evening, that's good, but it's like if you go to the gym once and that's it. You have to make it a regular part of your life to feel the benefits from it. So that's how it is really. So in terms of an online and in-person language exchange, how it works is you're speaking with a native speaker and you can pick any topic and it's just you and them if it's online. But then in person, it can be more of a group. And I personally prefer when it's in a group, because then if you run out of things to say or you're trying to catch your breath and have a sort of relaxed mid-conversation, then you can do. Because speaking with natives or speaking one-to-one with people in general is quite anxiety inducing. It takes a lot of mental effort, especially even for like extroverts. If you're used to chatting with people, after a while it can get a bit monotonous, or it can drain your energy sometimes. And if you're trying to practice your target language, especially if you're in the early days of it, like really early on, it can be a lot of mental effort. So I like group language learning sessions, especially in person. And that means you can make friends. You go to, basically what happens is you walk in the room, if it's say in Manchester, you sit down or you find a seat, you have a little name badge on you that says what your name is, obviously. And then you sit down, and then you also have, I think, oh yeah, you have your native language and your target language. And if it's one or two target languages, that's fine. So I might be like English, wanting to practice Spanish and Italian. So I might sit down with a Spanish person. And then there's four other people, and they're all, some of which are English, some are French, and they're all wanting to speak Spanish, and there's a Spanish person there. So that's how it works. But then there's also topics of conversation. So it might be about, say, hobbies like sports, for example, or the gym, or it might be about going out or traveling. And traveling is quite common. But the point is that there's normally hosts there who have like a timer, and the time it so that you have like half an hour speaking in one language, then you change to the other language, and you might also get up and speak with someone else. You might change the seats as well. So that's quite useful. So it makes it up a bit, so you're not just speaking with one person for 2 hours. And also it means that if you've had a bit of a practice of your Spanish, you try speaking Spanish, and you're a bit tired, you can just sort of sit back and relax as other people take over and they speak. So that's a really good alternative, and it means that you're making friends, and also you can see the actual real world impact of your efforts to learn that language. And afterwards, you can think to yourself, wait a minute, I've just spoken. It might be 2 words. It might be hello and goodbye to start with, or how are you, or what do you like to do in your free time, or something like that. It might be basics. And if you get a response from a native speaker and they're like, oh yeah, I like to do this, or karting and sports in my free time, and if you don't understand much of it, but they're responding as if they know what you mean, and it's a positive sort of conversation, then that's evidence that what you said is correct. And that's much better than trying to pick an hour on a Sunday afternoon to sit down and study Spanish grammar like I do, we do, you do. That's just, you might like doing that, in which case that's perfect, but I don't, and there's many people who don't like doing it. So that is one way you can make language learning fun, by actually learning it, by using it, making mistakes. And you should go in with the mentality that people will like you by default, and they'll be open to having conversation with you because they're there at that language exchange. And it's different to out and about in a pub or restaurant, because they're not expecting you to practice that language with them. So if you're at a language exchange, that's where it's better, because the environment is set up for you to be able to have a natural conversation with them, and they will be open to it, and they'll be very forgiving of your mistakes, and you're not really able to offend them by saying the wrong word, because if your like body language is positive, like, and you're smiling and everything, if you say a rude word by mistake, they might just laugh at it and smirk and say, oh, by the way, you said this, it's not a good word, but they'll let you off. That's happened to me many times when I've said the wrong word or a rude word accidentally, and that's how I learned. But I laugh at it now, because when I'm saying a word that's similar to it, as I'm getting near to it, I focus on my pronunciation and I really try and, or just use a different word, essentially, when I'm speaking Spanish or Italian and I'm about to say something, it could be offensive. So, yeah, that's what you can do. But basically, my point is that if you want to undo the negative feedback that you've created unintentionally when you're younger or in the past or on a language course, for example, and you want to create new evidence that you actually are capable of learning a language, that's how you can do it. That's one of the ways, really. In person is best, I believe, because it's more, there's no delay, there's no network issues, and you can see the body language, you can see where people's legs are, like if they're sort of folded or turned towards you, and also you can have a better in-person conversation, I think. Whereas online, it's more like, it's more restrictive. You can't see the depth of people's emotions on the faces and everything. And there might be a slight lag. That's the worst thing, I think. Because if you're trying to think of something and you say something and they say something exactly the same time, you can sort of cut each other off and it's not as good. Whereas in person, you're less likely to do that, basically, because there's no lag. It's real time. So that's what I would say. And then in terms of the psychology behind it, it's not the situation, it's not the language that makes you nervous quite often. If you think about when you were maybe years ago, you will have done a presentation at some point in your life where you have to stand there and present something to a room of people. Now, when that happens, even if it's in your native language, many of you will not like doing that. It'll be very nerve-wracking, very anxiety-inducing, and it's not because you don't know your native language, you are fluent in it, you know it, but it's the situation that you're in. You're there in front of many people and you're talking. Now, with languages, that can be the same. If there's, say, a group full of people and you're not familiar with them and you're, say my partner, who's Italian, she might introduce me to some new people who are Italian. And so far that's fine for me. But for many people, it might be that they have this subconscious feeling that those new people won't like you by default. Many people have that thought where you think to yourself, oh, I won't be liked by these native speakers, so I'm going to be quiet and not say a word of their language. But then the downside of that is obviously everyone talks around you and then you don't really know what's going on. You feel a bit alienated from the situation. But that's natural. That's completely natural. But my point is that sometimes if you're scared of speaking a language, it might be because of the situation you're in, so you're best to change that. So for example, if you have been in a bar or something and you've been trying to speak Spanish and it's been too noisy and you've not been able to hear the other person, if you can't have a conversation in English or in your native language in that place and you're having to shout and you can't really hear what they're saying, then don't even bother in your target language, because you're not going to be able to be understood at all or understand what's going on. And that will make you feel that you're not capable rather than the situation that you're in. So that's important. Take note of where you are, where you're trying to practice when you're trying to practice the language. Don't wait until you're amazingly good at it. You can start by knowing just a few phrases, and that can take you literally 2 hours of literally, you can use ChatGPT and search into it. Give me a few phrases to start off in Spanish when looking for directions, or insert scenario here when you're at a restaurant and you're speaking with a waiter. Ask for questions, and then if you use the voice feature of ChatGPT where you press down a little circular button, little microphone button, then you can start a conversation with ChatGPT, and that's available in the free version as well. You can then ask it these questions, or ask it to give you a few phrases that are useful, and then it will respond back with the English and the Spanish or your target language, and it'll tell you how to pronounce it as well. So that's super useful, especially if you see a word but it's like a J and they pronounce it as a H in Spanish, and you don't know how to say it. So that's an example of what you can do. But start with the basics like that, and then before you think that you're ready, go and practice it and just say one or two things, and always preface it when you're practicing with natives. This is a quick side note, basically. Don't say, oh, I can speak Spanish, can I practice with you? Say it in the sense that you're just starting out, downplay it. So you're saying, look, I'm keen to practice Spanish with you. And if it's with a way to say, can I try and make this order in Spanish? Can I try and say this order in Spanish? Are you available? Can I do it basically? And if they say, no, I'm too busy, then that's fine. But if they say, yes, of course, and they seem open to you, that's a really good way of starting a conversation or starting to try to practice that language. If you're not in like a nice, comfortable language exchange environment, if you're out and about and you want to try Spanish or whatever your language is, then you can do that. So just preface it by saying, I'm early on in my journey. Downplay it so that if you do it, if you say it and you make one or two errors, they'll still congratulate you. They'll be like, oh, wow, nice one. And they'll respect that you tried to speak their native language anyway. That's the biggest thing. That's the thing that outweighs anything, really. If you are making an effort to speak their language and you're making mistakes, they'll be fine with that because they'll be like, wow, you've tried to speak my language. And Italians in particular, this isn't a negative for them, it's actually a positive. They're really grateful when you try and speak their language because not that many people do. And obviously Italian is like a really, really nice language, like in my opinion. But they're really grateful when you try and speak their language. So if you say something that's really grammatically incorrect in Italian, but they can understand you and they can reply, most likely, despite your massive mistakes, they will absolutely love you for it. They'll be like, wow, that's amazing, sort of thing. And that will really help you because you can ultimately, the reason why you practice the language and the thing that helps you keep motivated is positive feedback from native speakers themselves, because that you respect them because you want to learn their language, and if they say a compliment to you, that'll keep you going so much more than a little success message on Duolingo saying, oh yeah, you've got that exercise right. That feels good, but the feeling of saying something, like many of you may have experienced this before, some of you may not, but if you say something to a native speaker in their language, they will be so pleased that you're trying to make an effort to speak their language and you'll connect instantly. And if you do that enough, then in your mind, next time you see someone who's native in your target language, like Spanish or Italian, then you'll automatically think that they'll like you from the get-go. And you'll be more open to speak and make mistakes. And you'll be fine with saying a few things wrong. Because as long as you're understood, that's fine. What might happen, though, is that as you're talking, there might be a loud noise or someone might cough or something, or you might pronounce something a bit differently, and they just want to confirm that they're hearing you correctly. So they might say, what, sorry, can you say that again? What? They might say it in the target language or whatever, or in your native language. But the point is that that's not you failing, that's the situation, or them not understanding it properly. And if obviously you got the accent a bit wrong, they probably heard what you said. They just want to confirm it, just so they don't get an incorrect response, just to make sure they heard you right. So if that happens, you might beat yourself up and think, this is annoying. I can't speak properly because they're not hearing me. But just think about the noise around you. And if you were saying that in your native language, quite often, if like there's different, like in Liverpool versus Manchester or Newcastle, some people can't understand each other even in English because there's massive colloquial and informal phrases and accent differences that sometimes you don't understand what someone's saying. And if they speak really fast or they slur the words or they're not very clear, that can also have an effect as well. So all of these factors, essentially, to summarize, all of these factors can mean that when you try and practice speaking with a native speaker, you might get a negative response. They might not have heard you, you might be in the wrong mental space, you might have been anxious, thinking, oh, James, come on, I need to be able to practice with this native speaker. This is my only opportunity. Let's get it spot on. Let's get it perfect. Then you say it, and they're like, "Oh, sorry, I need to get the order completely correct. Let's say it in English, please." And then you're disappointed. So a lot of things can happen like that. And in the past, if you've been told that you can't speak a language, well, give it a go. Try it again. Try and get new evidence, and try and speak with native speakers, even if you say one word at a time or one phrase at a time, to build up your confidence again. Because then what will happen is, once you do see that. The main thing about speaking with native speakers is that once you start practicing with them, as opposed to just on your language app, then your rate of improvement exponentially skyrockets. It gets so much better because it's like when babies or small kids speak. Once they start talking, they can just excel massively. The rate of progress is so high because they're doing it a lot. You'll get like a buzz every time you talk to a native speaker, and especially if you're like surrounding yourself or you have a regular interaction with them at, say, a language exchange, or even on like Hello Talk or something on your app. Once you get into that, you'll just go so much better, and it's more than you think it would be, if that makes sense. you would progress faster than you would have imagined to. Because I had doubts when I was in my Erasmus year, when I was sort of a few months in, and I was sort of getting the idea basically, but I was not doing very well in my mind. And then my language teacher said, "Oh, are you living with Spanish people?" And I was like, "Nope, 3 English people," which were very nice people. They were very nice, but they weren't ideal for practicing Spanish because you need to surround yourself. And it was only when I was like, okay, my teacher suggested that I have like a language exchange person, which is basically there was a Facebook group for Spanish people wanting to learn English and vice versa. So I did that, and you just go to a cafe and you chat with that person. And it was only when I did that and I was like stuttering quite a bit, but then had a few drinks and it gets a bit easier. I'm not promoting alcohol for language learning, but I'm just saying it can relax the nerves, especially if you're very nervous at the start. But that helped massively, the speaking with them, because it pushed me to try out what I thought I knew. And then when they actually understood what I was saying, and I was like, what, you understood that? But that would have been really wrong if I wrote it on my Spanish exam in my course. I would have got like 20% or something. It would have been very wrong me saying, oh, like if I want to say tomorrow I'm going for a walk, I might have said, oh, tomorrow walk I going am, or something like that, or missed off a load of words so that it's like ridiculously wrong. But that was understood, and I was like, wow, okay, that's cool. And then when the native speaker was like, was replying in Spanish, and I was a bit understanding it a bit by bit, but then I was doing that on a regular basis, not just once, but maybe once a week or twice a week, and then I got invited with their friends, and then we were watching like this show or something, and they were all speaking Spanish, and then I was hearing words that I'd heard before, and like in the Spanish course, I was listening like past tense, and I was like, oh, I've heard that word, that past tense word, and I used it in that context. So then, as you expose yourself to more of it, you get better. So that's the idea, and that's why if you listen to like TV or you watch TV shows or listen to podcasts in your target language when you're just not doing anything, you're just sort of chilling basically. Well, TV shows you'll obviously be watching them actively, but for example, if you're driving to work or commuting and you listen to a podcast, your brain will understand what's going on. It'll gradually get used to it. And that's what I was doing basically. I was exposing my mind and my ears to what the language was like, and I was spotting patterns. Your brain's really good at spotting patterns in what people are saying, and that's super useful. And especially when it comes to practicing with native speakers, if they say something back to you, you spot a pattern in what they're saying. You're like, you might not understand it, but as it's said more and more, and if it's a regularly occurring word, then your brain takes note of it and think, oh, that's important. If someone says I can or do or make, they're really common words that you use all the time. And your brain thinks, okay, these words are important because they're being used a lot. And it gathers context from the first time you heard it, then the second time you heard it, then the third time, and it makes an association with all of those words based on the context and how your emotions were at the time, and it saves it in your mind that's more easily accessible in the future because your mind knows it's important. And that's how it works from a mental or psychological perspective. Anyway, that is the first version or first episode of these long form formats that I'm doing. Very, very minimally edited, so it's more authentic and more sort of as I think of an idea, I say it. But hopefully it's been useful. It is a big barrier for people to learn language when it comes to speaking with natives, because I know from experience years ago that the first few times you speak with a native speaker, you think that they won't like you. You think that they'll hate you for making mistakes, and they'll be like, oh, you need to learn this language properly. And that might have happened for a few of you in the past if you've been on holiday and you've got a bad response from them. But try to reset yourself. Try and not make that prevent you from trying again. Obviously, you'll feel anxious when you try again, but the point is, give it another go. That's the idea. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll leave a link in the top left or right of this video for the next one. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Speak soon.